2010 to 2019, 10 years, the greatest decade of American muscle car insanity since the original muscle car era. Ford and GM threw everything at each other. Superchargers, magnetic suspensions, flat plane cranks, dual clutch transmissions, and enough horsepower to make the 1970s weep with envy. But here's the question nobody can answer without starting a fistfight. What was the best Mustang? And what was the best Camaro? And when you put those two champions against each other, who wins? Today, we're settling this, once and for all. Welcome to the Decade Tournament. But wait! Before the comment section explodes with Nürburgring times and skid pad numbers, let me be absolutely clear about what we're measuring here. This is not about lap times. This is not about who's faster around a track with professional drivers and sticky tires. No, today we're measuring something far more important: the intimidation factor. That combination of brutal horsepower, supercharger whine, visceral fear, and the unmistakable feeling that the car is actively trying to end your life. We're measuring which car made you respect it the most, and by respect, I mean fear. So here's how this works. On the Ford side, 3 contenders: the 2016 to 2020 Shelby GT350 and GT350R with that screaming flat plane V8, the 2020 Shelby GT500 with 760 horsepower and a dual clutch transmission, and the 2013 to 2014 Shelby GT500, 662 horsepower, the last Mustang with a solid rear axle. On the GM side, 4 contenders: the 2012 to 2015 Camaro ZL1 on the Zeta platform, the 2014 to 2015 Z28 with that Corvette engine, the 2017 to 2019 Camaro ZL1 on the Alpha platform, and the ZL11 LE track package. Let the elimination begin. Let's start with the GT350 and GT350R, 526 horsepower from the Voodoo 5.2-liter V8 flat plane crankshaft, redline at 8,250 RPM. This engine won the Ward's 10 Best Engines Award in 2016, and for good reason. It sounds like a Ferrari that learned to speak with a Detroit accent. The R version added carbon fiber wheels, MagneRide suspension, and track-focused everything. On paper, magnificent. But here's the problem. The GT350 is a European car in American clothing. That flat plane crank, Ferrari technology, that sky-high redline, you need to work for your power. Peak torque of 429 pound-feet doesn't arrive until 4,750 RPM. Down low, where American muscle cars are supposed to live, the GT350 feels almost polite, almost civilized, almost, dare I say it, refined. And refinement is the opposite of intimidation. The GT350 is a surgical instrument, a scalpel. We're looking for a sledgehammer, eliminated. Next up, the 2020 Shelby GT500, 760 horsepower, the Predator 5.2-liter supercharged V8, 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds, quarter mile in the mid-10s. On paper, this should be the obvious winner. It's the most powerful Mustang ever built. It would destroy everything else on this list in a straight line. But here's the thing. The 2020 GT500 has a fatal flaw. No manual transmission. Let that sink in. 760 horsepower, and the only way to access it is through a Tremec 7-speed dual-clutch automatic. Now look, that DCT is fast. It shifts in 80 milliseconds. It's probably the correct engineering decision for putting down that much power. But we're not measuring engineering correctness here. We're measuring intimidation. And a dual clutch that shifts for you? That's a computer making decisions. That's a safety net. The 2020 GT500 is terrifying in what it can do, but it's not terrifying in what it asks of you. The electronics are always there, catching you, saving you, making you look better than you are. That's not intimidation, that's assistance, eliminated. Which brings us to the 2013 to 2014 Shelby GT500, the Trinity engine, 5.8 liters, supercharged, and here's a crucial detail: an all-aluminum block. Ford ditched the heavy iron block of the past and used plasma-transferred wire arc technology to line the cylinders. Aerospace engineering in a muscle car. 662 horsepower at 6,500 RPM, 631 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. When this car launched, it was the most powerful production car ever built in America. Let me say that again. The most powerful. More than the Corvette, more than the Viper, more than anything with a warranty. That supercharger? An Eaton TVS unit displacing 2.3 liters, bigger than many four-cylinder engines. It produces 14 psi of boost, up from 9 psi on the previous model. The compression ratio jumped from 8.4 to 1 up to 9 to 1. Ford borrowed camshafts from the Ford GT supercar. They used a carbon fiber drive shaft. 90% of that 631 pound-feet of torque is available between 2,200 and 5,800 RPM. This engine doesn't ask you to rev it, it threatens you from idle. But here's where it gets interesting. The 2013 GT500 was built on the S197 platform, the last Mustang with a solid rear axle, live axle, beam axle, whatever you want to call it, the same basic suspension design that Ford used since the 1960s. 662 horsepower, solid rear axle, rear wheel drive. This was the last time Ford said, "We're going to build the most powerful engine we can and wrap a car around it. And if the chassis can't handle it, that's your problem." The following year, the S550 arrived with independent rear suspension. The live axle era was over. The GT500 was its final glorious roar. Now let's cross the aisle to General Motors. First up, the 2012 to 2015 Camaro ZL1, 5th generation. The LSA 6.2-liter supercharged V8, 580 horsepower, 556 pound-feet of torque. This was GM's answer to the GT500, and on paper, it was a worthy opponent. Supercharged V8, 6-speed manual, magnetic ride control, all the right ingredients. But there's a problem. The 5th-generation Camaro was built on the Zeta platform, shared with the Pontiac G8, the Chevy SS, and the Holden Commodore from Australia. It's a fine platform, capable, proven, but it was also heavy. The 5th-gen ZL1 tipped the scales at over 4,100 pounds. That's roughly 200 pounds heavier than what would come next. And in the intimidation game, that extra weight translates to a car that feels like it's working against you rather than trying to end you. It's a warship. We're looking for a destroyer, eliminated. Next, the 2014 to 2015 Camaro Z28. Now this is interesting. No supercharger. Instead, GM dropped in the LS7 7 liters of naturally aspirated fury from the Corvette C6Z06, 505 horsepower, 481 pound-feet of torque. And here's where it gets wild. The Z28 was a genuine track weapon. Multimatic DSSV dampers, the same technology used in racing. Pirelli P0, Trofeo R tires. No air conditioning, no radio, unless you paid to have them put back in. But that's exactly the problem. The Z28 wasn't built to intimidate on the street. It was built to set lap times. Those Multimatic dampers, brutal on public roads. The Trofeo R tires, basically useless in rain. the whole car was optimized for one thing: making professional drivers look amazing on racetracks. And that's not what we're measuring. The Z28 is a scalpel, a precision instrument. It doesn't scare you, it challenges you to be better. That's admirable. But it's not intimidation. Eliminate it. What about the ZL11LE? Same LT4 engine as the standard ZL1, 650 horsepower, but with the Multimatic DSSV dampers from the Z28. Adjustable front and rear suspension, carbon fiber rear wing, Goodyear Eagle F1, Supercar 3 R tires. It ran the Nürburgring in 7 minutes 16 seconds, faster than Porsche 911 GT3 RS, faster than Lamborghini Aventador SV on a track. This thing is a monster. But again, that's the problem. The 1LE package optimized the ZL1 for LAP times, not for street intimidation. The DSSV dampers are harsh on normal roads. The 3R tires are summer-only compounds that require warm-up laps to work properly. The whole package screams, "I'm going to embarrass you at a track day," rather than, "I'm going to scare you on your morning commute." We need something that's terrifying in real-world conditions, not just on the Nürburgring. Eliminated. Which leaves us with the 2017 to 2019 Camaro ZL1. Standard version. No track package. No DSSV dampers. Just the LT4 6.2-liter Supercharged V8. An all-aluminum masterpiece. Block and heads. It's the exact same engine from the Corvette C7 Z06, making 650 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. Notice that number, 650 and 650. Perfect symmetry of brutality. This engine was borrowed from the Corvette, not adapted, not modified, borrowed. The same motor that powers America's sports car, stuffed into a muscle car chassis. So here we are, Ford's champion, the 2013 to 2014 Shelby GT500, 662 horsepower, 631 pound-feet, live rear axle, manual transmission only, the last of the old-school Mustangs, GM's champion, the 2017 to 2019 Camaro ZL1, 650 horsepower, 650 pound-feet, Corvette engine, MagneRide suspension, independent rear, the beginning of a new era. 2 philosophies, 2 approaches. One question: which one is more terrifying? Let's look at the numbers. 0 to 60. Both cars hit it in 3.5 seconds, essentially tied. Quarter mile. The GT500 runs 11.6 to 11.8 at 125. The ZL1 runs 11.4 to 11.5 at 127. The ZL1 is roughly 0.2 faster. Top speed, the GT500 hits 202 miles per hour. The ZL1 tops out at 198. Ford wins that one by 4 miles per hour. Skid pad, the GT500 pulls 1.00 G. The ZL1 pulls 1.02 G. ZL1 has slightly better grip. But these numbers don't tell the real story, because these 2 cars represent fundamentally different philosophies. Ford looked at the GT500 and said, "We're going to build the most powerful engine possible and bolt it to whatever chassis we have." GM looked at the ZL1 and said, "We're going to build the best possible chassis and then add an engine worthy of it." Ford prioritized power. GM prioritized balance. Ford built a weapon. GM built a tool. Let me describe what it's like to drive the 2013 GT500 at the limit. You're sitting in the cockpit. The clutch pedal is heavy, notoriously heavy. Not Honda Civic heavy, not even Corvette heavy, workout heavy. Your left leg will be sore after an hour of traffic. You launch. The rear axle squats, and then, because it's a solid axle, it starts to walk. Not smoothly, not predictably. It hops. It skips. It threatens to swap ends if you're not ready. And that's where the GT500 bites. It's not during the launch. Any car with 662 horsepower is fast in a straight line. It's when the road isn't straight. It's when you're pushing through a corner and the live axle decides it has a different opinion about where you should be going. Period testers described it as a car that was easier to drive than its predecessor, which tells you how insane the previous generation was. This car doesn't have sophisticated electronics babysitting you. It has advanced track. It has launch control. But fundamentally, it's your job to keep it pointed in the right direction. Now, let's talk about the ZL1. You sit in the cockpit and immediately notice that you can barely see anything. The roof is low. The belt line is high. The windows are narrow. Automotive journalists called it sitting in a bunker. Changing lanes requires a combination of mirrors, faith, and prayer. But then you fire up the LT4. That Corvette engine roars, and you realize this car knows what it's doing. MagneRide suspension adjusts continuously, reading the road, softening over bumps, stiffening during cornering. The electronic limited slip differential manages power delivery with surgical precision. Performance traction. Management gives you 5 different settings to choose from. The ZL1 doesn't bite where you expect it to bite. It bites in its confidence. It makes you feel like a hero, and that's dangerous. Because at some point, you forget that you're piloting 650 horsepower. You push too hard. And when the ZL1 finally lets go, it happens fast. So which one is more intimidating? The GT500 intimidates you from the moment you sit down. The clutch reminds you this is serious. The live axle reminds you that technology won't save you. Every corner is a negotiation between you and physics. You know you're driving something dangerous. The ZL1 intimidates you after you forget it's dangerous. It's so capable, so composed, that you start to think you're invincible. And that's when it humbles you. The GT500 is a rattlesnake that warns you before it strikes. The ZL1 is a snake that lets you get comfortable first. Now let's talk money. The 2013 GT500 started at around $54,000. The 2017 ZL1 started at $62,135. That's roughly $8,000 more for the GM. Both of these cars could hang with or beat European sports cars costing twice as much. A base Porsche 911 at the time was over $80,000. A Nissan GT-R was close to $100,000. And neither of those had supercharged V8 muscle car drama. Here's something else to consider. The 2013 GT500 was the last Mustang that Carroll Shelby saw. Carroll Shelby, the man who created the GT350 and GT500 legacy, passed away in May of 2012. The 2013 model was the final car that bore his signature with his blessing. For Ford enthusiasts, that means something. The ZL1, meanwhile, carried the legacy of the original 1969 ZL1, a car so rare that only 69 were ever built. Both of these cars stood on the shoulders of giants. 662 horsepower versus 650, live axle versus independent rear, manual only versus manual or automatic, 54,000 versus 62,000. Old school versus new school. Ford's final act of live axle madness versus GM's first act of alpha platform precision. How do you even choose? Here's my answer, and you're going to hate it. Both of these cars are worthy champions, but they represent different kinds of intimidation. The GT500 represents intimidation through uncertainty. You're never quite sure if you've got it under control. The ZL1 represents intimidation through capability. You're never quite sure where the limit actually is. If you want a car that scares you every time you drive it, If you want to feel like you're wrestling a wild animal with every gear change, if you want the authentic 1960s muscle car experience with 21st century power, the GT500 is your champion. It's analog, it's brutal, it's honest about what it is. 662 horsepower with a solid rear axle is not a mistake. It's a statement. If you want a car that lets you access its terror, if you want 650 horsepower that you can actually use on public roads without fearing for your life, if you want the muscle car that evolved while keeping its soul, the ZL1 is your champion. It has the Corvette's engine. It has a Cadillac's chassis. It has technology that makes you faster without making you feel assisted. It's the muscle car that finally learned how to corner. Here's what makes both of these cars special. They represent the peak of combustion-powered muscle cars. The GT500 was the most powerful supercharged American car before the Hellcat arrived in 2015. The ZL1 was the pinnacle of GM's muscle car engineering before the 6th-generation Camaro was discontinued in 2024. Both of these cars exist in a window that's closing. Emissions regulations, fuel economy mandates, the slow march toward electrification. The era of 700 horsepower combustion muscle cars is ending. The GT500 represents Ford saying, "Here's all the power we have. Good luck." The ZL1 represents GM saying, "Here's all the power we have, and here's the chassis to handle it." Both approaches are valid. Both approaches are intimidating. They just intimidate you in different ways. So who wins the decade tournament? If I have to pick one, and I do because that's my job, I give the narrowest of edges to the 2013 to 2014 Shelby GT500. Not because it's faster, not because it handles better, but because it's more honest about what it is. The ZL1 coddles you with MagneRide and electronic differentials before it tries to end you. The GT500 makes no such promises. It's 662 horsepower, a manual transmission, and a solid rear axle. It's your problem. Figure it out. That's intimidation. But here's the real truth. Neither of these cars was designed to be practical. Neither was designed to be comfortable. Neither was designed to be a good value proposition. They were designed to make accountants nervous. They were designed to make engineers smile. They were designed to give us, the enthusiasts, something to argue about for decades. And in that mission, both of them succeeded completely. This is Car Chronicles, where we settle arguments that have been raging in parking lots and car meets since the muscle car wars began. If you want to see what happens when GM decides that 650 horsepower isn't enough and builds an entirely new engine, check out our Supercar Chronicles episode on the C8 Corvette ZR1. They ditched the supercharger, added twin turbos to a flat-plane LT7 V8, creating a 1,064 horsepower monster that makes both of today's cars look like warm-up acts. Link in the description. And if you enjoyed this decade tournament, smash that subscribe button. We've got 57 more years of Ford versus GM history to cover. If you want to fuel the next episode, consider helping us keep going with a coffee. Link to Ko-fi in the description. See you in the next one.